Welcome to the Startup Grind.
I'm Mike Mayer. I'm both the co-founder of Benjamin's Desk. I'm also the chapter director here in Philadelphia for Startup Grind. I know there's a lot of things going on every night here in Philly. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to welcome Mike Harris from Zonoff. Mike is what I've described as maybe the most experienced entrepreneur in the greater Philadelphia area that you don't know. There's a lot of name brand entrepreneurs located here in the greater Philadelphia area. Mike has been tremendously successful over the long haul, building companies, bringing products and services to market. To date, Mike's had several exits, included a NASDAQ IPO. He's a graduate of Purdue, computer and electrical engineering, serial entrepreneur, raised millions and millions of dollars, $100 million in venture capital, achieved $1 billion valuation with his NASDAQ IPO. He's the current founder and CEO of Zonoff. If you would, just please stand for me and give Mike a round of applause. Just got to check your mic real fast, Mike. Thanks for being here. Make sure you're not on mute anymore.
I think I'm good. Am I good?
Mic check, good to go? That's for you, sir.
Well, what do I need this for?
One for quality, one for broadcasting.
I got it.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
So glad to be here.
So this is your opportunity, what I call the open mic period. Feel free to say whatever you want about Zonoff or a little about yourself, anything you want to address the crowd with.
Well, I guess thanks for having me. Thanks for showing up and wanting to hear what I have to say. We'll see if it's interesting. I guess we'll find out afterwards, right? But yeah, I'm a longtime entrepreneur here in Philadelphia and a big fan of the Philadelphia community. There's obviously a lot of momentum now to really try and raise awareness and continue to grow the space, and so happy to be a part of trying to do that. There's been great companies here for a long time. It's just I don't think people know enough about them. We don't celebrate the successes enough, and so hopefully this will be a good opportunity to try and do my part.
Awesome. So let's get right to it. Purdue University. Where are you from originally? How'd you end up in Philadelphia?
So, Midwestern guy, grew up in Detroit area and Indiana. Went to school for computer engineering, hardware and software design is really what started that when I was 12 or 13 years old, and always liked startups and all the rest. And when I got out of school, one thing you learn when you grow up in Indiana and go to Indiana school is when you graduate, you really get to pick East Coast or West Coast. There's really not that much in the middle to go do. So given those choices, looked at a lot of big companies, and actually of all things, found a startup right in the area of my interest in King of Prussia. Moved out here in '91, and now it's home. Never been anywhere else since.
The East Coast Silicon Valley back then.
The East Coast, yeah, it was.
To it as.
I date myself a little bit, but I was in the Commodore Amiga area, right? I was building software and hardware for that as a kid. I wasn't a Mac guy, I wasn't a PC guy. I was one of those renegades that liked the 64 and all the rest. And then all of a sudden, I had this opportunity out of school to go to work for the biggest peripheral company in that space at the time, and that's a dream come true for a guy just coming out of school.
I usually ask the speakers, were you always an entrepreneur? What was your first entrepreneurial venture? And you and I briefly talked about that before the interview. But I think I think what's more important is to understand what's your definition of an entrepreneur. You looking back at your experience, I think we use it as it's such a buzzword these days. What's an entrepreneur to you?
Yeah, I think people talk about serial entrepreneurs and people that are, in it just to start companies, or that's kind of almost a style that people kind of attribute to people. For me, it's about, working with great teams and building products. That's what I like to do. The fact that it happens to be in multiple companies, because it's an opportunity, whether it's a new market that's interesting or new products that are interesting. It's less around, hey, I just want to start a company for the sake of starting a company. It's just happened to turn out that way a few times for me, is how I've approached it. But I think everybody's definition is a little different as far as why you want to start the company. Is it because it's about that dream of being a business owner, or is it about building a product or a service or whatever it happens to be?
One of the best things about being the guy who interviews these fantastic entrepreneurs that we bring in is I get to ask like questions that I genuinely and authentically think about on a daily and nightly basis that keep me up at night. And one of them that I asked Mike beforehand was like, what are you passionate about? Do you have to be passionate about the specific product or service that you're bringing to market, or can you be passionate about the action of bringing that product or service to market? And he had a really interesting response to that.
Well, I think passion is a huge part of it. I don't know that you can be, at least my view is you can't really be successful as an entrepreneur if you're not incredibly passionate about it, because you will have hard times, you will really struggle, and there will be challenges that you face over and over again. And if you don't have that passion, you don't love what you're doing, you'll get down. You just won't be able to stick through those tough times. Now, what makes you passionate? I think that's different for everybody. Me, I'm a product guy. I get really passionate around the products, the markets, the opportunities. I'm hyper competitive, so it's about winning, in that way as well. So, I tell people I don't work out, I don't go to the gym. I play sports because you can win, right? You can keep anything that keep score with, right? And so, for me, that's where my passion comes. I always said I couldn't work in enterprise software. I couldn't be, some guy in Tokyo that takes the train to work every day and designing lawn tractors for some guy in Iowa, because I couldn't really put myself and my heart into the product. So everything I've done my whole career, I've been a target customer. I wanted this, and of course everybody's like me, so they want to buy it too, which that's a lesson learned as well. It's not quite that simple.
So, our collective voice as the people here tonight at any Startup Grind event is to feel free to tweet and get the word out, because I think this is all important stuff. And hearing Mike say he's passionate about winning and winning's important to him, that's a good thing. So I encourage you, we won't take offense if you're on your phone tweeting stuff out at Startup Grind PHL, hashtag Startup Grind PHL. I usually start with the beginning and kind of work my way back. I want to jump right to Zonoff. Tell us a little bit about where you're at with the product and a little bit about where you kind of fall in the industry in terms of B2B, B2C. Where's the good fit for Zonoff?
Yeah, it's, Zonoff is similar to most of the businesses that I've run in that it's not a B2B business, it's not a B2C business. So we're not selling directly to businesses for their use or consumers for their use. We're B2B2C. We sell to businesses who then are the brands, the distribution channels that sell to consumers. So from that perspective, that's kind of an in-between. That tweener space is tough because there's a lot of investors that look at the consumer space. There's a lot of enterprise investors. Nobody really talks about the middle because there's some challenges with it. But I think once you understand those challenges and have some experience of how to overcome them, it can be an incredibly powerful way to go scale a business. Because you don't have to raise $150, $200 million to go create a consumer brand. And so that's ultimately what Zonoff is. We are a software platform company that sells the technology to run the connected home or smart home. We power solutions for big retailers, service providers, device makers to allow a regular consumer with their phone or their tablet, through a web page to control everything in their house, all these connected devices, whether they're door locks and thermostats to light switches and garage door openers. The company started in 2011. It's actually, we took the technology from another company in the Philadelphia area, spun it out along with the core engineering team to create the founding team of Zonoff back in 2011. Thanks, Jeff. Jeff actually was a big part of making that happen. And through
Jeff
that,
from Morgan Lewis,
so through that environment, that's when we launched the company back in 2011. We've got a tremendous team based in Malvern, PA, about 26, 27 people now. And interestingly, just last week we launched a whole connected home platform for Staples. So you can go staples.com/Staples Connect and see what we've been working on for a long time. That's one of hopefully many customers, in that same kind of vein to come to market with a solution that we power.
How many people are familiar with the Philly Startup Leaders thread, daily digest that goes out, by show of hands? So, the Daily Digest is really interesting. Jeff Goodall from Morgan Lewis put out something that was, I thought, both noteworthy and interesting. Mike, being an experienced entrepreneur, he's a guy that's raised venture capital outside of Philadelphia. He's brought several companies to exit via merger acquisitions, and also a company public through the IPO process to NASDAQ. That's incredible and amazing at the same time. And part of my goal here, I think, with Benjamin's Desk and Startup Grind is to raise the awareness about the caliber of entrepreneurs that we have in this area. And whether it's Philadelphia being Central Business District here at 17th and Walnut, or whether it's a greater Philadelphia area, there's a ton of awesome entrepreneurs, and you and I chatted a bit about that. Talk a little bit about, I think, the dichotomy that we represent when we say, come to Philadelphia and Center City because it's a place to get the best talent, and this is where you need to be. And I've been an advocate of that, and I still believe that. But it was interesting to hear Mike's opinion and his view on why the suburbs is actually a differentiator.
Yeah, I have this conversation with a few people. Gabriel Weinberg, if you know Gabe from DuckDuckGo, he's right around the corner from us. His house, he lives about a mile from me, and their office is about 2 miles from ours. And I know he says the same thing. Even though he's active in the Philadelphia community, it really is a community beyond just Center City. It goes out to the suburbs. For me, when I started and had a lot of my first businesses, it's always been out in the Great Valley area, Great Valley, corporate center. We've had, I think, 4 or 5 businesses in that specific corporate park. And that's where, kind of center of gravity for the folks that we brought back, into the teams multiple times have lived. But what's interesting, and one of the things that I really like about the Philadelphia area in general, is we've got some great advantages over New York, over Silicon Valley, over LA and other communities, and a lot of it comes to quality of life, school districts, hospitals, all sorts of things like that. Now, that ends up not being particularly appealing necessarily to a bunch of 21-year-old college graduates that really want to go and live in the city and be out all night or work all night, because at the end of the day, a studio apartment is a studio apartment, whatever city it might be in. But for me, when I look at this community, you look at our, the demographic in our office, it's the average age is late 30s, early 40s, not early 20s. Because for me, I think it's a great opportunity to go out, recruit in Silicon Valley, and sell those folks on, hey, now it's time, you're interested in getting married, you're interested in settling down, you're interested in having kids, come home. You can actually have a house with a yard and afford it, and sell the families to come out here, because the talent is there, and grandparents are here and all these other things. There's a lot of folks that we have that work, as hard as, anybody I know out in the valley. But they go home, have dinner with their families, and then they work second shift, right? Like I do, start at 10 p.m., work till 3 a.m., right? And yet these guys are incredible, guys and gals are incredibly talented, incredibly experienced, and you don't have to train them how to work hard, because we've already done that. So for me, that's one of the big things that we look at. Yeah, we love these incredibly talented, guys and gals coming right out of school, but I'll take a whole team full of 28 to 65-year-old, or maybe if they're not even retired, 75-year-olds. I don't care if they're talented and they're passionate about what they do.
Take us back to the early startup days of Ravison Technologies, and if you could, at least for me, maybe for the folks here, frame it from the perspective of sizable market and product fit. From the lens of when you first started the company, and then from maybe when you sold the company and looking back on it.
So with Ravison specifically.
Ravison specifically. Dive into what the technology was.
Yeah, so Ravison is an interesting story. That was the first startup I was part of that really ended up becoming big and successful in the area. That was a company I was one of the founders of.
And you guys all know this startup, even if you don't think you know.
You probably, you might. So Ravison, original name was Kiwi. Myself and a partner started it back in 1994. Now, it started as the outgrowth of another company that I had that had developed some core technology for video capture for laptop computers. Right? It was around the technology. It wasn't around a market. It wasn't around a fit. It was just a product, and of course, people want to buy that. Well, put it in a box, shrink wrap, put it on the shelf, and see what happens. Right? That was kind of the approach at the time. And it evolved over time because we didn't have a particular vision for solving a problem so much as we had a product that we were going to try to sell and find a home for. And again, that was a lesson learned. I'm an engineer. I was pretty fresh out of school, still 3 years out of school, and we took that product and then turned that into a desktop computer product that turned into video editing. And then we got into the professional video editing market and did our first OEM deal. And it was like, okay, people are interested in video editing. And then created a TV tuner card to tune TVs on your PC, because that's related to video editing, I don't know. But it was interesting technology, so we created one of those. And it was like, oh, well, we can make it playback compressed video with an MPEG-1 chip on there. Okay, people want that. Nobody wanted any of that. And then, somebody asked me, well, what about DVD? And I was like, I'm the CTO. And I was like, I hadn't heard of it. It was really, really new at the time. I said, well, we could do that too, right? We put a chip on it. Next thing we know, we ended up having the first operational DVD decoder in the industry. It was like, oh, that's interesting. And suddenly, a market found us. I mean, it wasn't any grand plan or grand scheme to go attack the market. And we were, suddenly rock stars in Japan, and everybody wanted to talk to us because they were developing drives, and they were content, and nobody had a way to test it or play it back. So suddenly we were paraded around to every consumer electronics company and PC company around, and it was off to the races from there. And it ended up doing very well. We ended up at one point probably having over 90% market share in DVD decoding in the industry. Every Dell PC shipped, every Gateway PC, every Xbox, every Mac. If you played a DVD in that computer or even consumer electronics player, it was our software that was actually doing the work. So we grew that company from the start with just me and my partner through to a little over 300 people. We raised a few rounds of venture funding, had more near-death experiences than I can possibly count, and ended up getting to about $1 billion market cap right before the market crashed. And so it was an unbelievable ride for a tech guy. And my first real lesson, hard lesson of what not to do in business, that's for sure.
And that was 94 when?
Started in 94. We raised our Series B round, $18.5 million, led by a West Coast fund in middle of 98, and then went IPO almost a year to the day in 99.
Wow.
And then watched the market crash in early 2000.
Tell us about your most recent startup, AnySource Media, and just for framing for the folks here. It was acquired by DivX, which was acquired by Sonic Solutions, which was acquired by Ravi, all in a very short period of time. I mean, like several years. 4x return in 18 months to investors, not too shabby. Talk about that process a bit, and it appears to be, was this like a warm-up in some sense for Zonoff?
Yeah, it was. AnySource was a great experience, and kind of each one, you learn these hard lessons in each ones of what not to do, and try not to repeat those same mistakes again. And one of the things that was probably most interesting for us about AnySource Media and what AnySource was is a software platform company sold to big consumer electronics companies, DVD player makers, Blu-ray player makers, TV makers, to bring internet content right into those devices without the use of a PC. So basically, internet connected, Blu-ray player, you could go watch content from the internet, videos and music and such. So we were a platform supplying that to folks like LG, Samsung. I mean, that was the vision really at the end of the day. For us, one of the kind of key elements there that had changed from previous businesses is rather than being a hardcore licensing business where we were making all our money on a per unit basis, that was the first one where we really drove into a new business model to drive recurring revenue. So we were giving the software away to these TV manufacturers and making money on transactions, advertising. At least that was the plan. That's what we pitched to investors. So we raised a little bit of seed money and a venture round, again here in Philadelphia. Started that company in 2006. Had a great team, again, based in Malvern. In fact, the same office, literally the same office, the same chairs, the same furniture as what Zonoff is in right now.
Legacy office.
Legacy office space, that is correct. We knew who negotiated the first contract, so we got a good deal on the second one. And so at the end of the day, we built that business, got to successful prototypes, and had some great shows at the big Consumer Electronics Show in 2008. And then in 2009, we still had not closed our first customer. The platform was just coming close to being completed. And in 2009, we met with a bunch of customers, and a chance meeting was with DivX. They came and saw it, and the meeting stretched from an hour to 2 hours. And I think they called on the second day after about 8 times to try and schedule a second meeting. When that meeting happened that evening, they brought about 20 people, including their general counsel and their CEO. And it was like, okay, they found something interesting here. And after that meeting, I told the team that was in the room, I said, they're going to try and buy us. And pre-revenue, pre-customer, and it took about 3-4 months of talking before they put a term sheet on the table, and we ended up negotiating the deal and selling that company, like I said, pre-revenue in the middle of 2009, which, as you may know, was a tough fundraising environment, but it was a $15 million cash deal for a pre-revenue tech company in 2009, wow. Which is we were very happy with. As you might imagine, right? Because it was that or raise more money. And the thing that strikes me, we had a great team there, and there's still a great team that has continued to, on with Rovi and moved down to the Radnor office for Rovi, is that it ended up being a really good acquisition as well. It was a very early exit for us. I mean, we never signed up for it, but I've always, taken the approach of build something for the long haul, build something, sustainable and successful, and, rather than trying to build it to exit, and the exit opportunities will appear. And then, you evaluate them at that time and say, hey, does it make sense, based on risk profile and everything else to go now, or should I just keep going? And in that particular case, it was such a good strategic fit that we went ahead and decided to go do it. And I couldn't have been happier. The company, that was based in San Diego area, and they did everything they said they were going to do. Threw a ton of resources on it, put them under our team, and really continued to execute. We closed LG, we closed other customers. It rolled out, into retail stores within a year from there, and I still have a ton of good friends there that now, through all those acquisitions, have kind of all, mostly moved on. But yeah, that was a great experience. That was we exited in 2009. I ended up leaving Divx in 2010, around the time that the Sonic exit was coming up, and wasn't really looking to do something new. I was really just going to do some mentoring here in the area, some angel investing in the area, and happened to be up at an event in New York. Saw a VC friend of mine, and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I was like, "Nothing." And he's like, "Hey, we have a seed fund, we're looking at some interesting areas, you have anything interesting you want to look at?" It's like, "Well, I'm, taking the summer off. I wasn't planning on doing anything." And he kind of pitched me on looking at a couple of spaces. One of them was home control. I spent that summer and got pretty excited and said, "Hey, there's a real opportunity here for a platform company." And then, pure chance, serendipity, whatever it is, met a small team here in the Philadelphia area while at a convention in Atlanta. Turns out the guy lived a mile down the street from me, and had exactly what we were looking to build, and went from there. And that was the genesis of Zonoff.
Do you remember what the other industries were?
So the main one I also looked at was advertising for connected devices. And that was a space where Google was strong. That was kind of what we had just come out of, and the venture firm that I was talking to was very big in ad tech. And so looked at that a lot and said, last thing I want to do is go compete with Google and Apple right out of the gate and be fighting for number 3. And so I was like, I'll pass on that. But this connected home space looked pretty interesting.
And with all the experience under your belt now, looking back on it, did you look at it through the same lens that when you looked at Ravison? You guys seemed much more product focused. And did you look at the size of the market and say, this is a white space that we should spend some time with?
Yeah, I mean, every stop kind of along the way, it's like what not to do, what not to do, what not to do. So we tried to learn those lessons, and there were a few things that I did differently here. One, I didn't just jump in because I was anxious to go. When I met this team down in Philadelphia, and they were based in Manayunk, I really spent some time, got to know them. I'm sure they thought I was crazy, but I met them in September. We started talking. They were like, "Hey, why don't you join us?" And I said, "You guys have been going since 2003. I've had, in my past experience, tried to come into a turnaround and faced all the baggage and all the history of tired investors that comes with trying to do a turnaround." I said, "So I'm not really interested in that, but I love the technology, I love the team. If we can take that out kind of cleanly and start from scratch, because raising money is hard enough, and trying to do something big without institutional funding is tough. And so for me, that was one of the first lessons: is don't inherit other people's baggage. So we with Jeff's help, we did a very clean transaction that was great for everybody involved, and spun the technology and created Zonoff from scratch. But one of the other big lessons learned was spend some time getting to know the people. So again, I met them in September. We started talking about this in November. They had like a little corner open in their office, so I kind of moved in. And I just started going down there a few days a week and getting to know them, spending time. And to test the idea, I actually went out and on my own just kind of rented a suite at the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas in January and pitched the concept. We had business cards printed up. The company didn't exist yet. Had business cards printed up the week before CES, and went out there and had some lots of context in the industry, and invited them in to see what we were up to, and the reaction was tremendous.
Like face-to-face customer development?
Face-to-face, we were giving them a demo as if this company was real, right? And some knew, some didn't quite know, and it was mostly real, but it was really this concept, and the reaction was very positive. And it was great for me because it validated the technology in the space that we were looking at with the customer base, but it was also, I think, equally important for the team to see that I could do what I said could do, and get top tier consumer electronics companies and other people to come and see us, and in fact invite us to cool parties and their suites and everything else. And it was like an eye-opening experience for that team. And then from there, literally I stayed and worked with those guys, and it wasn't until May that we actually did the deal to spin it out. And all that time I was just going in, and like I said, I'm sure they thought I was crazy that I just kind of started camping out at their space and getting to know them.
Gosh, there's so many themes between, back in May when I heard Gabe talk to hearing Mike talk. We had Bob Dorff 2 weeks ago, Steve Blank's midwife of customer development, and there's some themes here. Mike had a pretty quick exit with AnySource. Gabe had a quick exit, but you both hear about the real iterations. Iterations and pivots are buzzwords that we hear all the time in the startup world. The reality is the technology that you first, were inspired by with Zonoff was born in 2003. We talked earlier about a company that was born in 2001 and is just kind of coming to its full leg and growth period now in 2013. Bob mentioned a couple weeks ago, and it goes into exactly what you're saying, is you really need to be passionate about it, because this isn't, too many entrepreneurs I think are looking at 2-year flip exit as opposed to being passionate about the product or service you're bringing to market, enhancing customer experience, and being sustainable for the long term, which means, i.e., to Mike's point, which we talked about, was 7 to 10 years from now, those opportunities for exit, going public, those things will present themselves if you do that right.
Yeah, it's, there are these lightning strikes, right? You hear about the Instagrams and everything else, and they get, a tremendous amount of press where, it was only, 9 months to $1 billion exit and so on. It'd be great if you could plan those, but you can't, right? I mean, it's a hit-based business. If that's the model you're in, you have almost no chance, right? It's like planning to get hit by lightning. It's like, okay, yeah, you can go out in the middle of a golf course and hold your golf club up in the air and increase your chances, but do you really, it's not the best plan. Right. So for me, it's like, okay, I'm not going to try and get into hits business. We'll try to build something sustainable, and that takes time. It takes investment. But timing is a funny thing, right? We were in the right place at the right time, and we put ourselves in a position to be lucky with Ravizent, but then recognized the opportunity and took advantage of it. I've been too early to markets, with businesses, and or markets that just never materialized. AnySource, I think we timed it really well, but we might have been a little late from a technology platform. The beautiful thing about Zonoff, and I think one of the reasons why we're being really successful with it, is the timing was exactly right for us. It seems like it's been exactly right to really get positioned in the market, but we have the benefit of 10 years of technology development without 10 years of history with tired investors and people who are ready to get their money out. So it's almost like a best of both worlds. Great team, really talented folks that have worked together, are passionate about the space, and have built that, but yet is a relatively new company on paper.
We will get to Q&A, and I'm looking at Karn, Manish, Isaac. You have a product guy, you got a visionary here. When we get to Q&A, I hope one of the three or someone else that's building a product can ask a good question that's really intrinsic to what you're doing or a challenge that you're trying to overcome and ask him. I'm going to jump into a few hot topics that I like in the startup world that are dynamic questions that I like to talk with people on a daily basis. There's a million and one variables to raising money, but from your experience, and you've raised millions of dollars, when's the right time in your mind to raise money?
Always. I mean, I forget who said that. Always be raising, because there's a lot of good commentary on the web, and around in getting to know your investors and the right investors and so on. So from a timing perspective, I mean, literally, you can't start too early in creating those relationships with investors because they. It's again, lightning strikes. It's very rare that you'll just find somebody and they're like, oh, I want to write a check this week and here it is and let's go, right? I mean, it happens, but it's not a sustainable way to go plan on running your business. So getting to know investors, investing that time where they can basically track your progress. Tell them what you're going to do, go do it.
Right.
Then they'll ask you, what are you going to do next? And go do it and do that for about a couple years, and then eventually they might put money in. But literally it is that process of getting them to know you, and you want to get to know them as well. I mean, it's funny, a lot of people, you read a lot of these things about how to pick your investors, and they make it sound like there's, you got 50 guys lining up with piles of money to give them to you and you get to pick and choose. It's obviously it doesn't work that way in the real world for most people, right? Where sometimes hey, it's green, I'll take it, right? And you end up in a situation that you may regret later, but at the same time, it's about keeping the company alive. But at the same time, I think a lot of it is around targeting and timing. Getting to know them early. It's never too early to start to get to know people, and be really diligent in the list of people that you're going to go talk to and make sure they're interested in your space, they understand your business model, get to know them, and invest the time.
I saw a statistic somewhere on the internet, and it was venture capitalist out of San Francisco. I forget who it was, but he was saying he has never personally invested his money or his firm's money in someone that he did not know previously. It wasn't a random deck. It wasn't a random introduction. He had built a relationship with every person he's ever invested in over time. There's a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs in an area like Philadelphia where there's not a tremendous amount of access to capital per se, but I think we have a tremendous amount of talent pool here due to our universities and due to a lot of other factors. Do you have any good advice for a good starting point for them to begin a relationship with a venture capitalist in a way that's smart? Kind of a loaded question.
Yeah, it's for the most part, it's true what people say is that the best, in some ways, the only way to really meet a venture capitalist is through a quality quality introduction. We talked about that a little bit earlier today. It's almost like a first test for them. If you're not resourceful enough to find somebody who's willing to rep you into that relationship, then how are you going to be successful in your business, right? If you're not, creative enough to find a way to go get their attention, then how are you going to win business? How are you going to, convince employees to join when you have no money and all those other things? So I think it's a very reasonable, test for folks. Now that's easy for me to say because I've been doing this for a while and I have a pretty good network, and even then it's never easy to raise money. For those first time entrepreneurs, obviously it's much tougher. The Philadelphia area is obviously a very small pool of investors, so to me, look broadly. Now, not necessarily broadly to the West Coast because that's a whole different set of challenges, but our investors in Zonoff are both based in Washington, D.C. We don't have Philadelphia money, and other than Ben Franklin Technology Partners, which is a great way to get started as well. I mean, they have a lot of connections, and they've been in 3 of our businesses. But New York, there's lots of events. I was just up at a meetup in New York last night, and talked to 3 different VCs up there, all from great firms. So to me, it's about networking. Being here is a good start, even though I don't have, VC money to put to work. But I think it starts with doing that, and reaching out to them and getting introduced, whether it's if they blog, then commenting on their blog posts, offering value to them, whether it's, hey, I noticed something about one of your startups, it's a similar experience to what I have. If you can bring value to them, it's a lot easier to ask for value back later.
That's awesome advice. So you've had to grow several companies. Talk a little bit about team and culture and its importance. Is it overemphasized or is it critically important?
Critically important. Yeah, it really is. Because again, you're going to go through tough times. Character matters. It really, really does. And that's, we really have emphasized that, the last couple of startups where it's like, it's fit, it's personality. At Zonoff, we have just a tremendous team. Everybody gets along. You don't see the politics. You don't see a lot of those things. And to get to, almost 30 people and not see the signs of that, I think it's a testament to a lot of the folks that are there that are, doing the hiring, doing the recruiting to try and, bring in a diverse crew, but at the same time, people that, both passionate and good character people. And honestly, I think that's a great advantage for Philadelphia as well. The people here, it's a loyal crew. People don't hop from the next hottest startup. You got it in Silicon Valley. Recruiting is tough, but because you're recruiting against these perks that are out of control, whether it's the Googles, the Apples, and all the rest. But one of the worst problems is keeping those people. That what have you done for me lately? It's like, oh, I've got my options, but we haven't raised money in 2 months. This next startup is going to offer me a pile, and that might be the 12-month billion-dollar exit, and I'll get my lightning strike there. So our crew at Zonoff, a lot of these folks I've worked with, some of them as long as I think the oldest guy or the longest I've worked with anybody there is now 23 years. Across 4 startups. Michael Marks here in the audience, he and I started working together in '95. So, but at the same time, then they bring in their friends and they bring their friends, and it starts from there. It starts with networking and knowing people.
That's awesome. That gets me pumped up to see such a long-lasting relationship and being able to build a company with someone like that. It's like a family. It
is. You spend more time with these people than your own family. So if you don't like them, it's really brutal. You're sharing cars and airplane flights and meals and occasionally hotel rooms when you're really tight on funds. But you get to know these people, right, really, really well. And so from that perspective, you better, it's just like the passion about work. You better like what you do and better like the people that you work with, because life is too short to work with assholes, as they say.
What do you think, Mike? Is he right?
Yeah, no, it's true.
We hear a lot about execution over idea, but sometimes the best ideas are too big, making it difficult to start, grow, fundraise, all those things. What ideas are interesting to you, and how do you define execution as opposed to what I hear often on the internet when I talk to people about just getting shit done, for lack of a better way to say it? What defines strong execution to you, and how do you differentiate strong ideas from executable ideas, if that makes sense?
Well, you have to have an idea, and I'm always of the view. It has to be a big idea. If you want to build a big venture-funded business,
we're talking about institutional
investors, all that stuff. If you want to do that, it better be a really big idea. If it doesn't have the opportunity to grow into a multi-billion-dollar company, then you're going to lose VCs right away. Because that's what's interesting for them, right? They have to be able to return huge, have an opportunity at least to create huge returns. I think one of the challenges in Philadelphia is people, oftentimes startups I meet with, they think small, right? I was talking to a guy just recently, and he was talking to a local investor.
How small? Not to interrupt you, but I'm thinking $100 million. If that's
well,
what you think about
yeah. If that's like the top end, you're thinking too small, right? I was talking to a local entrepreneur, great, talented young guy who's building a business, and he was talking to a local investor, and they said, well, I don't think you have what it takes to get to a $40 million exit. I was like, $40 million exit. If that's what your goal is, then you're thinking way too small, way too small. Now that doesn't mean that a $40 million exit isn't incredibly successful and isn't great, because it is.
Sure.
But the point is, if that's the end goal, you're going to get along the path, as opposed to, I want to build this. And again, it's not about dollars amount as much as owning a market and building something big and sustainable. We talked a little bit about AnySource. What that vision behind that company as it evolved, as we were starting it, was, we were going to be the user interface on every TV. Wow. For everything and every set-top box. We were going to reinvent how you go find content, through consumer electronics devices. That's where any source, from anywhere, any source, whether it's the internet, from its optical. That's a big idea. That's a huge idea, right? And when we started, we looked at it and we said, okay, well, let's skip optical discs for right now, and let's, skip the pay-per-view content and the channel guide, because those are crowded spaces. Let's start with one of those sources, like video on the internet, and go from there, and then we'll grow it from there. Well, it turns out nobody was really doing that very well at the time, and we found that subset of that idea ended up being a successful business and a successful exit.
All right, rapid fire. You ready?
I never answer slowly, right? So they're all long answers. I don't know if I can do rapid fire.
These are easy. What's your favorite book, if you're a book reader, or a book that you recommend?
Oh, boy.
Are you a book reader? Do you read most of your content on Twitter, or do you not read content? Because it's overwhelming these days. I mean, I get content from every direction. I get a little overwhelmed.
I read books on the airplanes, but I read them so fast I don't remember what the last one was. Because a lot of it's funny. I see people that they ask that question. Again, so much for rapid fire, and they give these big long. I love War and Peace. I really get into that. And I read junk, thrillers and stuff like that. That I forget about by the time I get off the airplane, but it's still like a total distraction. It's like, okay, and that's the only time I really get to read.
But I'm sure it's a helpful distraction too.
It is. It's like totally mindless nonsense.
All right. What do you do for fun?
I work. Work is fun. I love what I do. When I go home, the only TV I really watch, I have sports on and as background noise, and I research the market, and it's fun for me because I love what I do. I love the market. I love the products and the technology. And I play sports, competitive sports that I can win at, right?
I love it. A man after my own heart right here. 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. with SportsCenter on the background.
That's it.
That's the only way to work.
That's what I do.
Love it. If you could wave a magic wand and change anything you want, what would you change?
Wow. More time to spend with my family and still do what I do. I love what I do, but I mean it's tough. That's one of the advantages of being in the suburbs and being in a startup is, and I missed it today, my daughter had a basketball game at 4:30, and I would have loved to have been it because she scored a basket. She's 12, and that's a big deal. I asked her if she dunked over somebody, and she said no. She is tall though, not that tall. But that's always true. There's always sacrifices, and that's one thing to really understand. But that flexibility where I can actually go home and have dinner and then go back second shift, right? Yeah. Laptops have been an amazing innovation when it comes to the work we do.
What sports?
Well, I don't play. My wife made me swear off football. I was a football player is what I really love doing and everything else. But as you can tell from the nose that's been broken 5 times, it's.
What is it, Boiler Up?
Boiler Up, yeah, that's right. I
ended up her doing football. Boiler Up.
Well, not this year. This year's not a good year. But so I stopped that, and then I tore my ACL last year playing basketball. So now I've had to swear that off, and so I'm like slowly moving toward golf. I haven't gotten all the way there yet. So now it's like tennis and softball. It's like stuff that an old fat guy can play, which is what I am now these days. So I can still compete and yet not move that well.
Who was your biggest role model growing up, and why, if you had one?
My dad. My dad is one of the smartest guys around, who an engineer by training and has, I think, over 100-some patents. If you have a gas cap on your car, you have several of my dad's patents in there. I mean, he basically, a lot of the venting stuff that you click on your gas cap, that was my dad, right? But it was always about how do things work. He was not a business guy at all. it was all about running R&D and engineering and inventing stuff every day. And it didn't matter whether it was at home or work. I mean, nothing ever got hired to get fixed in our house. We fixed everything, and it was great. And they'll, talk about another, magic wand thing. My sister lives in Savannah, Georgia. I'm up here. When they just retired, they had to pick. They went to Savannah. So unfortunately, I don't get to spend enough time with them. I don't know why they didn't pick the weather up here.
Over the last 2 years, it's come readily apparent to me the importance of mentorship and building communities and building ecosystems. What are your thoughts on mentorship, and do you have any good examples in your experience?
Well, I do think it's a lot easier to find mentors now than like when I was starting out. I mean, whether it's internet, blogs, all these other people, and people that are willing to invest times, networking events, and there was none of that. But you have to be smart enough to recognize the opportunity to have one and take advantage of it, because there are people who want to do that, particularly entrepreneurs who want to, every entrepreneur I know wants that next entrepreneur to be successful. I mean, they're passionate about startups and want to see everybody be successful and are willing to give time. They may not think to go make time because they're so busy running their existing businesses or whatever. But if you meet them and find them, they'll be full of great advice. I didn't take advantage of the opportunities I had enough at the beginning, so I ended up running into walls that I easily could have avoided had I just asked the question. Fred Best, who I don't know if you've been in the industry for a long time, Fred was our first investor at Ravison, and he's really one of the most respected guys in the area as far as really bringing value. And regret-wise, while I worked with Fred for a long time, I didn't nearly take as many opportunities as I could to learn from him on a whole variety of topics.
Final question before Q&A. What's your parting advice for any entrepreneurs in the audience that are thinking about or in early stages of launching or growing their business?
I think there's a lot to be learned from other startups. We have a guy who's running product management for us, who I met at a Philly Tech Meetup event, about 6 months ago, and he really wants to do a startup. And he went and he joined us because he wanted to see it. Now he's 6 months later and he feels like it's been 6 years, and his eyes are still this big, and his hair's still blown back because he worked in the defense industry beforehand. But he's learned a ton. He's learned just a ton, and same sort of thing. Knowing that going in, we talk about financing events, which otherwise he might not be interested in. He gets to see every part of the business because he made it very clear that's why I'm here. I'm doing this job and I'm doing all the rest of the stuff, but I really want to learn about startups. So I think there's a lot of value there that not enough people take advantage of, is to go work or intern or do whatever at startups that are successful. Even if they're not successful, you can learn things not to do. But at the same time, go out, talk to other entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs. Events like this I think are great. My advice probably pales in comparison to what some other folks have done, but you're going to learn a lot. And people have done it before, so why repeat a mistake when there's lots of folks who've figured it out before you.
Awesome stuff, awesome advice. Mike, on behalf of Benjamin's Desk and Startup Grind, thank you so much. Folks, would you give Mike one round of applause, please? As always, I have my call to actions here. One, between Mike today and Bob Dorff a couple weeks ago, we've had a tremendously successful and experienced entrepreneur as well as a thought leader. Please, I beg you, bring a friend, partner, peer to the next event. I think they're really, really valuable, and your friend or partner, whoever you bring, won't be mad after they leave here, because I think they're going to find just a fantastic amount of inspiration, education, and networking that goes on here. Call to action number 2. Yesterday, in partnership with TwitChange, Just Good, Indiegogo, who's a sister portfolio company of ours, the UN Foundations, and others, we broadcasted live from BD for Giving Tuesday. I wasn't able to be here. Katie ran the show, but it was a pretty successful event. So in light of the holiday season, I encourage you all to find ways to give back to your community. Katie, can you just give me a 10-second plug on Operation Social Santa? I need toys.
Sure. So we're partnering with this really awesome cause called Operation Social Santa. They're in their 4th holiday season. It's founded by a Temple student. So we're collecting toys all month long on the 7th floor, but at all of our December events. Most if you bring a toy, you get it for free or you get a few bucks off. But it's just to do good. All the toys are going to be donated to Toys for Tots in light of the holiday season. So if you want to bring one by, you can stop by any day this month.
Awesome. In the words of Mike Harris, give before you get. I love it. Thanks so much again, Mike. One more round of applause. Feel free to hang out. Mike will be here for 20 minutes or so. More food, beer, sodas, drinks. Get someone's business card. You have it.